The Rivian R1T is without a doubt one of the most hotly anticipated new electric vehicles in America. It's just a few years late. I pre-ordered this very Rivian about 3.5 years ago, and I finally got my hands on mine. Now, I will say at this moment that I do feel a little bit salty about Rivian bypassing their pre-order system for a number of people out there. It looks like a number of journalists and other influencers have somehow managed to get their hands on a Rivian R1T before pre-order holders. Now, I know some of them have said, oh, there was one hanging around that nobody wanted. I call BS on that one. Every pre-order holder out there would get their hands on a Rivian R1T if they wanted to, and there's always a next person in line until you've run out of pre-order holders, which they absolutely have not. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the review of this Rivian R1T. Obviously in this video, I'm going to be talking a lot about the elephant in the room, which is the Ford F-150 Lightning. It is shipping at the exact same time as this Rivian R1T. I also have a pre-order on it. I'm going to be buying both, and then which one I end up selling or keeping, I just don't know yet, to be perfectly honest, because I love aspects of both of them. I have to tell you, I was super duper excited about Rivian when they first announced this truck 3.5 years ago, and I have spent years and years and years waiting for it. So some of my comments in this video may seem a little bit negative. I think that's perhaps just my own wish for the Rivian and reality and how those two end up lining up. I'm also told that I tend to be a little bit harder on vehicles that I like, and there is a lot to like about the Rivian, but there's also some criticism where it's due. Now, as far as what is the Rivian, that is a little bit tricky to explain. Some folks have said inaccurately that this is a unibody truck, and I may have used some terms around that about exactly what the Rivian is. Let's clarify everything. This is technically a body-on-frame vehicle. There are some unanswered questions, and then there are some answered questions. So the big thing is that the body and the bed are one piece. So it looks on the outside like it's more like a Honda Ridgeline, except that underneath the vehicle, we have a frame which houses the battery pack and the electric motors, the front and rear suspension units, and then the body is then put on top of that. The frame below could roll along in its own right. That's the skateboard architecture that Rivian has for all of their vehicles, including the R1S. When you approach the R1T, you'll definitely notice the distinctive look. You'll also notice that the climate control will start, the doors will unlock because I have my smartphone in my pocket here, and I'm actually going to use that to turn off the R1T because you'll notice that the air conditioning is pretty loud on the outside. The look is distinctive, and I really like it, I have to say. I love these headlights, the ovaloid headlights with the LED modules in there. It has a little Rivian logo in there, and then this bar that runs right across the front is illuminated as a daytime running light, and it will also function as a charging indicator. So when you're charging, it will be green, and then as you lock the vehicle, the only green indicator will be the charging port right here behind this little door, which is again locked. The rest of the truck's dimensions are where things can get a little bit confusing. The R1T comes only in one size, 217.1 inches long. That means this is longer than the shortest F-150, but it is about 12 or 13 inches shorter than the F-150 Lightning. This slots right in the middle of the Toyota Tacoma's size range, which will go all the way up to 225 inches and down to 212 inches. The confusing dimension on the Rivian is the vehicle's width. It's 81.8 inches wide, not including the side view mirrors. That makes this actually a little bit wider than the base F-150 or the F-150 Lightning, and significantly wider than a Toyota Tacoma. And you can really see what's going on here. It has this pretty aggressive bell-shaped curve that we typically find on performance SUVs. This does have pretty wide tires back here, 275 width tires, so definitely wider than average in the compact or mid-size truck segment. But the track is a little bit narrower than an F-150 Lightning. So in terms of width, this really falls between worlds. But you'll notice that this bell shape does not include the cabin. So the cabin, in terms of width, is a little bit closer to a mid-sized truck, even though the exterior dimensions in terms of parking space utilization, I guess you'd say, is actually a little bit closer to a Lightning. The linear light bar theme continues out back, where we find LED turn signals and brake lights on the outside, and then this light bar that runs right across the rear. Big Rivian logo down there. Hitch receiver is currently uncovered. There is a cover that comes standard with the vehicle. And then rather than a pretty typical release for the tailgate right around there or a camera module, they put the button over here on the side. Then the tailgate drops down right like that, and it has a little ramp so that we can very easily get cargo from the back on here over to the tailgate. To be perfectly honest, some truck features of the Rivian R1T strike me as being designed by someone that's never really designed a truck or owned a truck before. Some of that is good, and some of that could be bad depending on what you want to do with your truck. I really love the idea of this little ramp. It really makes it easy to pull cargo in and out of the back of the R1T. Although I could see that if you wanted to do more heavy-duty construction work, if you wanted to, for instance, throw gravel in the back of your bed, then gravel is definitely going to get caught in some of these areas, and that could be a bit dicey. Also a button module on the side rail is this one right here just behind the cab. That opens the cargo tunnel that we find on either side. There's a door like this on each side. It also functions as a step, so you can use this to get up into the vehicle a little bit more easily. You can use it as a chair, you can use it as an equipment platform, or you can use it for storage because there is a tiny little cubby inside each side where we have things like the tire inflator kit for the vehicle thanks to the onboard air pump. There's also a 120-volt inverter outlet inside, and a roller shade style opening from inside the cabin. So if you wanted to put cables or things like that, or just reach back in there to grab whatever it is that you might have put back there, you can do that through that little hole in the rear seats. Now the cargo tunnel is a little bit tricky to film, but there's the door on the other side of the cargo tunnel, there's the opening to the cab, and you can see that the walls and the ceiling of this area are covered in very sort of trunk-like fabric, I guess you could say. Now, one thing worth noting, the cargo tunnel, you have to close it pretty hard if you don't want to really press on it there, and then to open it, it just pops open just a little bit. You then have to put your hands in here, possibly scratching your paint, and then you could open it. I really wish that there was a better solution to that, perhaps some sort of aerodynamic handle. We do find aerodynamic handles on the rest of the body. These are powered. When the vehicle is unlocked, they're open. When the vehicle is locked, they're closed. Powering the R1T is your choice of 3 different battery packs. Only the middle pack is available currently. It's 135 kilowatt hours, 128 of it is usable. Coming a little bit later, there's going to be a smaller pack, just over 100 kilowatt hours, and a bigger pack, 180 kilowatt hours, that will theoretically give the Rivian about 400 miles of range. That is the battery pack that I really wanted. However, I decided to go ahead and downgrade to the mid-size pack in order to accelerate my delivery. The mid-size pack and the large packs are going to be available with the 4-motor setup, which is what I have here. The base battery pack will only be available with the dual motor setup, which will give you about 600 horsepower. This one is all the way up at bat crap crazy levels, 835 horsepower standard. Although interestingly, the 4 motors are not in fact identical. The ones up front are a little bit less powerful than the ones in the rear. And these are not wheel and hub motors. The motors are inboard in a module that combines the 2 motor units, and then it has half shafts off to the outside. Up front, we get a total of 415 horsepower and about 413 pound-feet of torque. In the rear, we get 420 horsepower, 495 pound-feet of torque combined, but still pretty darn similar. Now, there is no mechanical locking connection between the sides of the vehicle. All the power management is handled electronically inside. And that's part of the reason we find such a powerful total horsepower output for the vehicle. Because if you're in an off-road situation, which is theoretically what the Rivian is designed for, where only one wheel has traction, they needed to make sure that motor was big enough to do something with the Rivian and actually get it out of that situation. So we have over 200 horsepower on a single wheel, over 200 pound-feet of torque on a single wheel, and then it can direct power however and wherever it is required. So you can get 210 horsepower on one rear wheel, 207 horsepower on one front wheel. It doesn't matter exactly how that combination goes. The vehicle could just direct power around as needed. Charging happens behind the power door on the driver's side front fender. As you can see, there's definitely some theater as it pops out and then rolls around. The onboard level 2 charger is rated at 11.5 kW. That is definitely slower than the 19 approximate kW charger that we find in the F-150 Lightning. Range is always a tricky subject to talk about with an EV, but it's made even trickier on the R1T because of the kind of options that you can get on your truck. There are a few different trim levels, and those trim levels with their different front bumpers and different underbody options will definitely have an impact on your range. But more importantly, there's the wheel and tire options list on the R1T. If you get the road tires, that's going to be the most efficient way to get your Rivian. If you get the all-terrain tires, that's the least efficient way to get your Rivian. And I suspect that Rivian decided to EPA test probably a model with the all-terrain tires, so that way they just had to do it once. They just chose the lowest number, made it easy, made it less expensive to test. It's clear that Rivian spent a lot of money developing the suspension in the R1T. Not only does this have an adaptive height suspension standard, adaptive damping standard, it also has a hydraulic anti-roll system standard, which is really an interesting twist. This is pretty similar to what we find in some modern McLarens, although its functionality here is more like what we find in a Jeep Grand Cherokee with front disconnectable sway bars. This has the ability to effectively change the amount of sway control that the vehicle has front and rear for more optimum off-roading angles. And then in addition to that, we have really massive amounts of ground clearance. In the lowest height aero mode, which would be in conserve mode in the lowest height setting, we get 9.5 inches of clearance. That is more than we find in the average half-ton truck in America, period. That's more than we find in any version of the Lightning. In the all-purpose drive modes, it's going to range between 10.1 and 13.1 inches of clearance, significant amounts there. And in the off-road mode, it's going to go all the way on up to 15 inches of ground clearance. As I have to fiddle around with the app in order to unlock the vehicle to open the front trunk, I'm reminded of another valid criticism for a lot of new EVs, not just the Rivian specifically. This also includes pretty much every Tesla out there. The whole using your phone as a remote and the lack of a start button inside the vehicle means that the two are basically the same thing. You approach the vehicle, it unlocks and it turns on, and it has now turned on its air conditioning compressor. I find that a little bit annoying because as I'm gardening in my yard on the weekend, I find myself walking to the vehicle and it's turning on and off for no particular reason. Now, under the front trunk, which is a power open and power close mechanism, we find a little bit less storage space than we find in the F-150. In this cargo area, we have 2 tiers of storage. We fold up this floor and then put it into place. It has magnets that lock it right into place, and you can open or close the front trunk with that up or with it down. Down here, we get the included EVSE and the little lock cable for the included gear guard system in the vehicle. Up front, we have a fabric net that we can toss other goodies. Likely for aerodynamic reasons, there are no assist steps to help you get back into the cargo bed, although you can, of course, pop down the gear tunnel's lid, use that as a step, and then walk right back here into the cargo area. When properly equipped, you'll get 1,760 pounds of available payload. This particular model with the options on it drops that down to 1,623, which likely drops the towing down a little bit. Theoretically, it will top out at around 11,000 pounds. Now, if you want to know how the R1T tows, I have a separate video on that coming up, so be sure and stay tuned for that one. I have to say in advance, I'm not the biggest fan of the way this feels when it has a trailer connected to it. It's a complex set of things, so be sure and check out that video. A spare tire is available in the R1T. It would go in this under cargo floor storage area, which is currently blank. This is an option you can add later if you don't get it from the factory. I had initially requested it, but this model was available and it didn't have it. On the driver's side of the bed, we find the integrated air compressor. You simply set your target pressure using these buttons, hit the play button, and then it will start inflating whatever it is that you're inflating. It will automatically stop, check the pressure, and then stop finally when it has reached the pressure. Below that, we have the gear guard cable inserts. You put those gear guard cables in here, wrap them around whatever it is, put it in the other one, and then if someone tries to tamper with your stuff, the alarm of the vehicle will go off. And on the passenger side of the bed, we find 120-volt power outlets for the onboard inverter. On each side of the bed, we find aerodynamic tie-downs for your cargo, but these are not adjustable, nor are the ones in the bed. From this angle, you can really see how that step integrates there with the bed. Now, one interesting thing that's also between worlds is the amount of space we get back here in the bed itself. This is a 4.5-foot bed, so it's 6 inches shorter than the bed we find in a Toyota Tacoma, but the distance between the wheel wells is actually about the same as we find in an F-150 Lightning. So width-wise, this bed is about as wide as the one we find in the Lightning, although the opening is a little bit narrower. In the Lightning, the opening is a little bit wider and then things duck in for the wheel wells and then duck back out on either side of the wheel wells. This is more consistently one size. For me, at least, I found the front seats to be very comfortable, and they feel a little bit smaller, but almost as roomy as the average half-ton truck in America. The interior, however, is a little bit narrower. One interesting twist is that on the outside, maximum vehicle width is pretty similar to an F-150, but on the inside, the cabin is about 6 inches narrower, mainly in this upper area. So you will feel that distance to the side pillar there, distance from you to the passenger is a little bit closer to something like a Toyota Tacoma than an F-150. Certainly the center console is a little bit smaller, but we have a very comfortable driver's seat position, multi-position memory via the driver profile system on the instrument cluster, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and a powered tilt telescopic steering column, same range of motion for the passenger seat. We also have heated and ventilated seats up front. The experience in the back seat is perhaps a little bit more like a luxury 2-row SUV like a Range Rover or perhaps a top-end Jeep Grand Cherokee than the average truck in America. Lots of premium materials abound here. Real wood trim on the back of the front seats, USB port there, real wood trim on the doors, lots of soft touch materials, including the lower portions of the rear doors and the lower portions of the front seat back. We also have that touchscreen that I'm going to show you here in a bit. The rear seats are a little bit higher off the ground than the front seats. This is definitely stadium style seating. So it does have the effect of cutting down on rear seat headroom. I have about ½ inch of headroom left if I put my head all the way back there to the ceiling, but you'll notice I am several inches above the driver, so it really gives you a commanding view of the road from the back. There is a completely flat floor, just as you'd expect, although that's not too uncommon in pickup trucks. Right here in the middle, I still have plenty of headroom. My hair is not even touching the ceiling if I lean all the way back there, but the seating position is a little bit further forward, making it a tiny bit awkward. That could also be a little bit awkward with some child seats where you might not want them to be that far forward. You might want a little bit of extra room. The R1T isn't just an electric truck. I would argue this really is a luxury truck as well, something that we haven't really seen in the United States for quite some time. It's really obvious on the interior parts quality, attention to detail, and general design, etc. Logically, there are going to be less expensive versions of the R1T coming at some point. We don't know what those will look like, but at the moment, pretty much everything is like this, with things like the really nice suede headliner, speakers in that headlining, this very large panoramic moonroof. It does not open, of course. This is very Tesla-like in its openness. I also have the same sort of complaint. It's not quite tinted enough. I would love to see an LCD design or perhaps a bit more tint, or just a regular steel roof option. We have height-adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, but rather oddly, fixed headrests for the driver and front passenger as well. Fixed but removable headrests for the rear passengers that could make installing a child seat just a tiny bit easier. There's a Rivian logo right there between the seat sections. This is a very style-forward, very luxurious interior, lots of contrasting bits. There's a fabric insert right there in the middle of the seat color. I originally wanted the green interior because I thought that was really, really cool, but I opted for this black interior because I thought, well, if I do need to get rid of it, maybe this would be a little bit easier to sell. I'm still not sure. I like the design of the seat, however. The doors, lots of premium materials going on here, lots of cool ambient lighting touches. For instance, if I zoom in on this section of the door and the camera focuses, you can see that right there around that trim, soft touch materials, stitch materials, ambient lighting strip, lots of real wood going on in here as well. And unlike pretty much every other truck sold in North America at the moment, lots of soft touch materials still going on down there at the bottom of the door, including around that storage area. Moving over to the dashboard, that really unique design continues, but instead of 2 glove boxes like we find really in most of the pickup trucks sold in North America, we have 0 glove boxes right over here, so there isn't even one in that below area. I do find that a tiny bit awkward because where do you put your license or registration, things like that? There is a tiny storage area right here under the passenger seat that is not the most convenient location, but that's where I've put everything for me. Now down there at the bottom of the floor, you can see one of the other cool touches here. We have Chili Witch sort of placemat style floor mats, I guess you could say. These look really, really cool. They're not overly functional. They are kind of slippery, and I probably would replace those with more all-weather style mats if I were to keep this vehicle long term. In the middle of everything, we have this very distinctive large LCD, of course. It gives us full mapping there. The built-in map database, it's very snappy. We get satellite imagery, you get charging information. You can see it's very, very quick responding, but no CarPlay, no Android Auto, etc., nothing like that. We simply have Bluetooth interface, we have TuneIn, we have Spotify, and then we have FM radio. So no satellite radio there for that option either. Climate control is one of my frustrations with this system. I've turned up the lighting here so you can see what's going on. If I click over here to the climate control, very much like we find in Teslas and Porsches, you have to use the screen to move the air vent around. I'm not clear what was wrong with a vent that you just moved by hand. Those are just a lot easier to deal with, especially since I zoom in closer here actually, you'll see that the vanes are powered vanes inside. So the vehicle is just moving the vanes around, and there's a upper air slot and a lower air slot. It's moving those around and directing air wherever it might need to be. It's just that if you like air blowing more on your face than just on some other part of your body, you're probably not going to like the system because it really doesn't direct air in that way. It's just going to be sort of nebulous around you. We then have controls for the heated and ventilated seats. Over here we have the drive mode controls, all-purpose, sport, conserve, off-road, towing, etc. You can also adjust the ride height on the right-hand side of the screen within these different drive modes. So for instance, in off-road mode, we only have highest, high, and standard, but if I go to all-purpose, then we have the choice between high, standard, and low, and in conserve, it would just be low and lowest. Again, keep in mind, lowest is really not that low. Here you can adjust the dampers, stiff or soft, that's the default. You can also adjust the amount of throttle lift-off regen you get. This does not have a blended braking system, keep that in mind. So this is going to be much more like the Tesla than the Lightning. Then there's a button to turn on and off the stability control system. Vehicle options in some of these other screens, 360-degree camera setup. For a vehicle that is very focused on off-roading, there aren't as many off-road camera views as I had thought there would be. There is this 360 view, but you can't just focus in on a particular quadrant like you can in a Range Rover or some Jeep models, etc. This becomes a little bit less useful, and the quality of this image is not quite as crisp as I would like. If I put the vehicle in drive, you'll notice that on the rear camera view we get lines, which I'm not quite clear why they're there because we're in drive, but on the front camera view, no lines to show you where you'd go. Also unusual, the vehicle doesn't really give you too much of an idea about where your energy is going, how it's being used in the vehicle, but you can get various range estimates based on driving history with 21-inch road wheels. So you can see full charge on conserve 326, all-purpose 301, sport mode 297. Between the driver and front passenger footwells, we have a large storage area there. It's just a little bit above the floor, which would otherwise be flat. And then back here, we have a dock for the integrated camp speaker. Unfortunately, my camp speaker has suddenly decided to lock itself in there and not unlock, so I can show you. We have two cup holders that pull out right from there, an area where you can store a smartphone or things like that in an upright position. And then this has a Qi wireless charging mat underneath it. I know in an earlier video I said it did not have a charging mat. That's because it is really, really finicky. I had a lot of trouble trying to get my iPhone 13 Pro Max to charge, even without its case on that little mat. On the back of that console, we have two traditional air vents for the rear passengers and then a rear climate control screen. On the driver's side, we find a full LCD instrument cluster. This indicates the ride height. So you can see those little bars over there indicate the ride height. That indicates the mode. We're in off-road mode and we're not quite at the highest setting. Over here, we have a ready indicator. If I put it in drive, you'll get a slightly reduced car view with some surround sensors there. And then as you're driving down the road, it's going to give you a very Tesla-like view of the road with the automatic safety system detecting cars and then putting them as little images in the lane lines there. On the left-hand side, we find a moving map display, but at the moment we're not close to any paved roads. And then down here we have a battery indicator and then a range-o-meter, but not a percentage display for the battery. Oddly enough, the only place you'll find battery percentage is in the energy screen on the infotainment system. The steering wheel is not quite round. It does have a mild flat bottom, split bottom spoke there, sport grips up top, wood trim on either side, and then identical button banks on the left and the right. These function for different things. These will normally act as cruise control buttons over here on this side, increasing and decreasing your speed, adjusting the following distance. This is going to be infotainment, volume up, down, track forward, backward. But also they do other things. So very much like Tesla, because they want to minimize the buttons here, if I click over to this thing and choose the steering wheel option, this is how we adjust the steering wheel. You have to use the buttons on the steering wheel to adjust the in-out and then adjust the tilt of the steering wheel with that one there. Side mirrors, same thing. I click the side mirror option, then this adjusts the right side mirror and that one adjusts the left side mirror. I do find that a little bit more convoluted than simply having the appropriate buttons. Probably the best way to describe the way the Rivian feels out on the road or out on the trail is if it didn't have a Rivian logo on it and it had a Range Rover or a Jeep logo on it, and they said this was the latest version of the Range Rover pickup truck or a Jeep Grand Cherokee pickup truck, I would totally believe it, because that's really how this vehicle feels. Although admittedly, with, again, some features here and there that make me feel like this is a new manufacturer that's never built a truck or an SUV for off-roading before, like those camera views that could definitely be better. For instance, on this tight trail right here, I would really love a camera view where I could see what my front tires were doing, what the dimensions of the vehicle would be, things like that. And I would love to be able to drill down with some of the many, many cameras this vehicle has around the outside to see exactly what's going on around the R1T. This trail is definitely tight and some of the areas might be sketchy for a truck this size, so we'll just have to see how this goes. Now, going up this trail, lots of nice traction here, even though this is on the road package, road tire package, I should say. And that's probably the best and most challenging way to actually really try the Rivian R1T is try mild trails on the road tires. You can really see how the traction management system works because you don't have the added traction of those all-terrain tires on it. That part of this, they have definitely sorted out very, very well. This knows where to send the power, how to send the power. There's always going to be a little bit of wheel slip on the left or on the right when you're in off-camber situations when traction is reduced, but it does recover very rapidly and it sends power over to where it's needed. Again, it's just that on some of those more tricky trails, etc., you are going to notice that you are going to end up in situations where you're digging out the trail a bit much. So for instance, this next section, let's just scoot up to the highest ride height because this has a pretty long wheelbase. And turning right up here can sometimes be tricky, can be a little bit close. So I'll just go ahead and hang out here while we wait for it to achieve its highest height setting. Because different kinds of off-roading are going to require different off-road software settings because of the four-motor setup, we do have all-terrain, soft sand, rock crawling, rallying, and drift mode. So for this, I think I'm going to go ahead and pop it in the rock crawl mode. For this one, in rock crawl mode, it doesn't just adjust the way the motors and traction and stability control work or the ride height. It also turns off things like the automatic brake hold, but you can turn that back on if you want to. You can also turn on and off stability control, etc. So let's go see how this goes here. Again, definitely confident feel, but different feel than you'll find in some vehicles. So lots of slip here. And around there, you'll definitely see that it's trying to move power around. One wheel is digging in. and it's continuing to dig as I press on the throttle more. It's really, really obvious there. Now I'm gonna have to back up because this is a 3-point turn kind of turn here. And that gets us in another off-camera situation with different tires off the ground. Turning the wheel. Again, spinning, 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 spinning. Then it pulls through. And then up and over that little tree right there. As with most air suspension vehicles that have an off-roading mission, when it's in its highest height mode, you will definitely notice a peculiar suspension feel. That's because the wheels are pushed all the way down towards the bottom of their suspension travel. Not a lot of rebound left, and that's why speeds are limited to 20 miles an hour max in that off-road mode. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop it back into the all-purpose mode. It's going to take us down to a still very, very high off the ground, 11.5 inches of ground clearance. Every drive mode has a lot of ground clearance in this vehicle, and that's part of why the fuel economy is a little bit lower than you might think. When the vehicle is in its standard ride height and soft, it is definitely very comfortable, so I'm definitely going to give ride quality an A here. If I put it over to the stiff mode, things do firm up, but it doesn't really become unsettled until I put it in the lowest ride height mode, which is going to be in conserve, and then in stiff mode, that definitely is peculiarly stiff. So for most folks out there that want a road trip, you're probably going to want to keep it in soft mode at a slightly higher ride height, perhaps low rather than lowest. That's going to be a little bit more comfortable. With over 800 horsepower on tap, obviously acceleration is blistering fast. 3.2 seconds is what I got in this time after time after time. And rather unusually, the 0 to 60 time is pretty consistent all the way down to pretty low states of charge. Even down around 20% battery, it was still able to do 3.2 seconds 0 to 60. So this is not like some EVs where you get the maximum performance only at those higher state of charges, and then below about 50% you don't get as much. Now in conserve mode, this turns into a front wheel drive truck, and that did surprise me. I would guess that the most logical reason for that is that you're going to get the most regen braking on the front electric motors. And when they say front wheel drive, they're not kidding. Right now I'm in conserve mode, and if I try and climb this hill, the traction control is intervening all over the place because I'm just two-wheel drive and it's just too slippery to get up the hill in that mode. And that was completely floored. If I put it, however, into all-purpose, then I get just four wheels spinning and spinning and spinning, lots of additional traction. So you do have the flexibility between those two modes. Now in front wheel drive mode, 0 to 60 happens in around 6.5 seconds. So still relatively swift, but not 3.2. Bearing in mind that my model has the all-season road tires on it, I had expected the stopping distance to be honestly pretty long, but this came in at 124 feet. I was really surprised by that because this weighs over 7,100 pounds, nearly 7,150. The amount of grip that the tires give us in the Rivian isn't just obvious in the 60-0 stopping distance, it's also obvious in the handling score. I'm going to give this an A when compared to pretty much any truck in North America right now. At higher speeds, yes, this is not going to have the grip that we find in some of the competition, but it is going to have a level of composure, a level of poise and presence that we don't find. It also has a rear suspension that doesn't get upset over broken pavement. It doesn't have that typical empty pickup truck vibe because this has a big heavy battery pack underneath me. Over 7,000 pounds of curb weight. It's pretty evenly distributed front and rear, or more evenly, I guess you'd say, than the average pickup truck is probably the better way to describe that. It leaves the rear end not feeling that much different when you have 500 pounds in the back or you have it completely empty because there's always a reasonable amount of weight back there. Also, this is a four-corner, fully independent suspension, like you'd find in a full-size body-on-frame SUV or the F-150 Lightning. So interestingly, this and the Lightning are more similar in terms of their suspension feel and their suspension dynamics out on the road than either of these vehicles compared to a regular F-150 with a live axle on the back. There is one caveat, though. The combination of the hydraulic anti-roll system and the air suspension can give the suspension a little bit of a peculiar feel. The way to describe the suspension is not necessarily good or bad, it's simply different. And because it feels different, it's going to highlight itself, and some drivers may not like it on first bite. However, if you buy one of these and you drive it for any length of time, you will become used to the way the suspension feels out on the road. It definitely has a tune towards the softer side of things, but it's mainly the way that the air suspension and that hydraulic anti-roll system combine to make the vehicle very level, but still sort of float over the road imperfections, which is a combination that we don't normally see in new vehicles out there. If you start pushing this harder and harder out on your favorite winding mountain road, you'll see that the suspension stays very, very level. Something that's been unclear since the Rivian R1T was announced is exactly how much isolation is there between the frame of the vehicle and the body in which I'm riding, because they could be rigidly attached with bolts or they could be isolated like we find in the average truck in America. I'm not entirely clear still how that is done in the R1T, but after having towed with this vehicle, I can say that there is definitely more isolation in here than you'd find in a unibody vehicle, whether that's a unibody truck or a unibody SUV. So it is clearly more isolated than simply bolted together. But again, exactly how much isolation we just don't know. But that isolation does yield a decent quietness score on the interior. I measured 70 decibels in here. That is among the quieter trucks in America, so this certainly gets an A when it comes to cabin noise. You will hear motor whine, however. You can definitely hear that, especially when you're flooring the vehicle or when you're regen braking. You're definitely going to hear more motor whine inside here than a number of EVs that I've recently tested. Something like the EGMP vehicles from Kia, those are definitely quieter. The Lightning definitely appears to be quieter inside. If you like hearing the electric motors, you're going to like this. If you want a quieter, more peaceful experience, you might want to shop somewhere else. This is something that Rivian could probably address with future updates here and there, but those would mainly be hardware updates. I doubt that electric motor noise is something they could really do too much about in software. When it comes to fuel economy, the R1T did a lot better than I had expected. I averaged 2.65 to 2.7 miles per kilowatt hour on my road trip range test, which is a 246-mile test loop. After that loop was done, I just continued driving and driving and driving at 70 miles an hour until the battery was empty, and this went nearly 340 miles. Rather unfortunately, I don't have my Lightning to cross-test with this Rivian just yet, although a Ford Lightning from Ford themselves is going to come next week, so be sure and stay tuned for a head-to-head video. At least for the moment, bottom lining the Rivian is pretty easy. This particular model was about $75,000 plus tax, title, license, and destination, but if you want one of these now, you're going to be paying a lot more for that thanks to the price increases from Rivian, or if you were to get one used, you're going to be paying an awful lot more than that as well. Same thing goes with the F-150 Lightning. All of these are spoken for their first year of production. All the Lightnings are spoken for their first year of production. So for that head-to-head video, I will let you wait until I have that video on the channel. Bottom line, the Rivian is a very practical and pragmatic, but lifestyle-focused pickup truck. And what I mean by that is that this has features that we don't find in the average truck, like these cargo tunnels here, where you can put a camp kitchen, things like that. Power tonneau cover, which is a really cool feature, but also some features that are a little bit less normal truck-like the location of the hitch receiver in the back. Not a fan of that at all. Not as focused on some of the off-roading camera views and other views that you might expect out of an off-road pickup truck. The suspension feel while towing is decidedly peculiar. I am not the biggest fan of that in the Rivian R1T. Again, separate video on that one. But for me, that is a problem for the Rivian. I like everything else about it, however. It tows a lot, it performs incredibly well with a 10,000-pound trailer on the back, and it turns really, really tightly. That is definitely a huge advantage for this over the F-150 Lightning. If you are concerned at all about the dimensions of the vehicle, this is going to work a lot better. And that's part of the reason that I find it such a tough decision between this and the Lightning. I like the way the Lightning tows better. It's not as fast as this, however. This is certainly more fun. The interior is light years ahead of the interior in the F-150 Lightning. Significantly more luxurious, much more like a luxury car befitting of the price tag of the Rivian here. But when it comes to actual towing, it's not the best. It's not quite what I would like. But we have the practicality of that tight turning radius, which for me is incredibly important. So that would be one reason to choose this over the Lightning, depending on exactly which direction I go in the end. Also, there is the peculiarity of the size and the segmentation of the Rivian. It's not quite mid-sized, it's not quite full-sized. It is somewhere in between these two worlds. So if you want a bigger back seat, you're going to find that in the Lightning. If you want the more luxurious interior, more comfortable front seats, you're going to find that here. Front trunk is honestly not too far apart, although one is more easy to use than the other. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section, and what would you pick if your money were on the line? Would you get this? Would you get a Lightning? And let me put this a different way. Which of these vehicles would you be willing to pay $10,000 over MSRP for? Which one do you really, really like more? Maybe that will factor into my decision. Let me know down there in the comment section, and I'll see all of you later.